In 2014, one of the toughest follow-up acts in Mercedes history began, the launch of the AMG GT model in September at the Paris Motor Show. Chassis code C190 for the coupe, followed by R190 for the convertible, pulled in a team with the unenviable task of replacing the Mercedes SLS and its thunder-making 6.2 naturally aspirated V8. Except actually it didn't. The unenviable task wasn't to replace the previous Mercedes, but to become the new flagship car for the AMG brand, which was becoming a sub-brand of Mercedes as of 2014. The space frame chassis is coded MSA in Mercedes' internal designations, making the AMG GT a competitor for Exotica and supercars rather than a sports car or fast car rival. Under chief designer Gordon Wagoner and a team including Robert Lesnick, Gabrielle Nemeth and Huey Lee worked under lead AMG GT designer Mark Featherston, while the interior was designed separately by Jan Kool. Together they set about making something that was unmistakably Mercedes, but also an ongoing competitor in a world that was busy talking about downsizing engines and looking towards hybrid assistance to make horsepower. The decision to stick with a V8, this time a new generation engine already in use at Aston Martin and the latest C63 AMG, made the car more accepting to the motoring press and eager customers that had purchased an SLS and now wanted something fresh. I will add though that if the loss of the 6.2 V8, in this case coded M159, is just too much to bear, you can take solace in the fact that it was retained for the GT3 and GT3 Evo racing cars. Formula One fans will recognise the AMG GT from its stint in 2016, 2017 and as early as 2015, but others of you there will be thinking, oh, I'm sure I've seen it since 2017, and that is true. In 2018, the GTR model went into the racing safety car mode for Formula One, and then that was replaced in 2021 with the Black Series, which shared safety car duty with the Aston Martin Vantage. There are more than just 3 variations of the AMG GT though, and while I will clarify power differences later, it's important to note that each model aims to offer something different. The entry specification into the GT range was launched in 2015 with a GTS model alongside it. The GT lacks several of the GTS features, including keyless go being an option rather than standard equipment, and the race mode missing entirely from the engine modes, and a passive exhaust system limit the range of settings the AMG GT had. There were more critical driveline differences in a lack of adapted suspension and the electrically controlled limited slip differential also missing. From the outside the looks are marginally different, with 19-inch wheels all around on the GT and staggered 19-inch front and 20-inch rear on the S. For more noticeable exterior differences you would want to find one of the Edition 1 models of the GTS. This adds a variety of gloss black trim and a fixed rear wing. It appears at launch that Mercedes attempted to align the AMG GT to compete with a class of cars that are more grand touring than the GTS, such as the stark differences, almost as if the engineers had built the GTS model as a base car and then been told to go away and take things off to make an entry model for those that cared more about cruising in a sporty Mercedes with style rather than the true substance beneath it. No surprise when speaking to some old colleagues that the motoring press would generally send GTS cars to test unless they asked for the entry GT. 2017 is a big year for the AMG GT. Not only is the car facelifted and the convertible added to the lineup, but a big announcement from Mercedes in mentioning the X290, the chassis code given to the 5-door version of the AMG GT, with a release penned for 2018. Although I will note here, these two cars are named the same, but this is not a stretched version of the AMG GT. It rides on the MRA chassis shared with the CLS and E-Class rather than getting a stretched MSA platform from the GT. 2017 adds a GTR and GTR Pro model, a GTC Roadster and GT Roadster, followed by a GTC Coupe, but no Black Series as had been mentioned in 2015 by then CEO Tobias Moers. The GTC can sometimes get sidelined when talking about the GT models, as the R and R Pro along with the refreshed S all come out around it, but the GTC not only gets a limited model named the Edition 50, of which 500 are made, but It adds rear steer and has a wider body than the GTS, the rear steer being an option that was not offered on the S model, so if you find one of these for sale, it is well worth a look at over a GTS model. The GTR is where things step up, with wild styling additions. It pulls in elements of the GT3 race series cars to include manually adjustable coilover suspension and rear wing, plus some active body aero. But to make this car stand out as the one to buy for track use and to target the Porsche GT cars, the AMG GTR loses several features from the GTS, like keyless go, and most of the sound system speakers are lost, plus the power fold mirrors are removed. All of this is to say if you are planning to use your AMG GT as a street-only car, the GT, GTS and GTC will likely be more attractive propositions, unless this is a real weekend and sunny weather car that you don't mind accepting compromises to add performance. The Michelin Sport Cup 2 tyres, meaning only the brave will attempt to run a GTR on a wet, chilly morning in Banbury, even with the additions of active aero, although admittedly Lewis Hamilton and Valtteri Bottas could be the exception to this back in 2018. The GTR model set a Nordschleife lap ring record for rear-driven and road-legal cars at a time of 7 minutes, 10 seconds, .92. Now I want to add for those of you that love the look of the GTR that several of the styling cues that were put onto that car were also put onto the facelift AMG GT and the AMG GTS. The GTR model is discontinued as of 2021 when the Black Series model is finally released. The Pro version was first seen at the 2018 LA Auto Show and went even further to pump up the AMG GT, this time the styling unmistakably from the facelift GT model, with lots of carbon fibre and lightened components added, including parts that were options on the normal GTR, like carbon roof, carbon bucket seats, and its own forged wheels. A track package will be listed as an option if added to a GTR Pro. If you aren't sure, look for a full roll cage and a fire extinguisher inside. The seatbelts were also replaced with 4-point harnesses. A GTR Pro model is really only for track use and occasional use on the road. This car is a clear step away from the more road-focused models. When it went to the Nordschleife, it didn't just beat the GTR version to which it is based, it smashed it by a full 6 seconds, a 7 minute and 4 second .632. To avoid going into the weeds, I will note that the GTC and GT and GTS do feature some active aero and utilise a similar system to the GTR, with less functionality and higher focus on airflow for cooling and improving aerodynamics to cut the air more smoothly rather than channel the air for improved downforce. The 2020 upgrades were slightly less subtle than the 2017 as Mercedes looked to refresh the car for its final run. The instruments and controls stepped towards a digital display, a new grille and headlights appear, and the front bumper became divided into 3 segments, while the back split into 2. Apple CarPlay and Android Auto was now standard across the range. This marked the end of Mercedes tinkering with the road-biased versions of the car, but finally the more hardcore version were ready for the world. The GTR and R Pro bow out, and the GT Black Series arrived for 2021 model year. A special edition Dark Knight was released at launch, but these were immediate collector specials. However, the Black Series wasn't exactly a car for the masses, and everything was turned up to 11, as it appeared we might be moving into a world that could lose the V8 engine. Changes on the Black Series are thorough. The one that is immediately noticeable is a switch from the cross-plane crank to a flat-plane crank, making the car sound very different from the rest of the AMG GT range. And changing the firing order, the engine becomes named the M178 LS2. Suspension tuning isn't just different, it gets unique parts and allows for manually adjusted camber in line with other Black Series cars. Pilot Cup 2R tyres are made for the car and engineered at track performance, while legal for the road, just. Carbon fibre is now used across the car. The easiest and fastest way to understand the changes isn't with words, but Nordschleife times. A 6 minute, 43 second .616, chomping over 20 seconds off the track time of the already hardcore track-focused GTR Pro. Putting this into sharper focus, the AMG GTS originally had a 7 minute 33 second time. To see any car that put 50 seconds between the sportier versions of the standard car and the hardcore track model is almost unheard of. As previously mentioned, a GT3 and GT4 race version was also made, along with an AMG GT Track Series car. No safety testing was done on the AMG GT similar to other high-performance vehicles, so we'll move on to the common faults section, and a reminder that if you enjoy the video, to consider subscribing for future guides and car videos. A quick caveat that some issues have been recalled in certain markets, while others deal with each car at a dealership on a case-by-case basis, so a full and comprehensive Mercedes history can be a bonus if you do have a problem. Let's start with the more minor issues. There are two sensors, the rain light sensor, which can store a fault code and refuse to work, and the parking sensors or radar sensors are common to develop a fault where one has a fault and shuts down the system. A good specialist will try and locate a single sensor to replace, then reset the system, while some dealers or specialists will choose to just replace the whole system. Sensors and modules are a much higher cost than paying for the labour time to find a single sensor issue. Sometimes you are very unlucky and a module has thrown a fault to all sensors, requiring a wholesale replacement. A common fault among sports cars is battery drain, as people leave them sat for long periods. For starter, battery tender is advised if possible, but any array of faults flashing up should make you question the battery first. The AMG GT can have other sensor issues than just mentioned, but if you get into the car and have 10 faults appear on the dash with a Christmas tree of errors, this will likely be a low battery voltage fault. Unfortunately, a clear code or warning for this can be buried in a sea of other faults, causing a low voltage, as preventative maintenance is worth replacing the battery on a shorter interval than most cars. A wheel speed sensor fault will throw a whole host of faults too, especially if it becomes faulty while the car is on and rolling. Several owners have breathed a huge sigh of relief on having loads of warnings flash up and had their car recovered, assuming a massive fault, only to have a mechanic change either wheel speed sensor or ABS sensor, especially on cars driven on poor roads, as road debris can sometimes get caught in the wrong spot and make the sensor go faulty. Wheel alignment should be done on an AMG GT either once a year or less for track use or fast road driven cars. If you've caught a curb at the track several times or hit some of the potholes that compete with the Mariana Trench on most main roads, wheel alignment issues will wear tyres very fast on the AMG, but will also cause a sensor fault if you run out of tolerance for an extended period of time, usually 20 days or a certain distance, normally a couple of 100 miles or kilometers. Now, a number of infotainment problems have plagued the AMG GT models. However, after 2017, these do seem to get a lot better, and most of the issues can be resolved with simple software updates. If you get a speed limitation warning, usually 190 kilometers per hour or just shy of 120 miles per hour, this will likely be one of two issues. A suspension sensor has recorded a parameter out of tolerance and stored this to urge the driver to visit a workshop where a full inspection of the suspension can take place. A reset to the sensor and cleaning the code should solve the issue, but if this occurs, you have likely stressed a component that should be inspected. It might be fine, but even on the entry-level AMG GT, suspension tuning parameters are fairly narrow, and so if a bushing or part has been worn, it will likely cause bigger issues. If buying from a dealer or used specialist that has access to a ramp, it is worth getting the car on a ramp to view the underside. Obviously, this won't be possible everywhere, but I found numerous reports of AMG GTs bottoming out. Usually, the damage is limited to the front active aero if fitted. However, in some cases, it had damaged other areas that then slowly fail over time. An honest seller may not even know there is damage, as if the car isn't fitted with active aero, is unlikely to throw a code for a fault, and so it would be an unknown issue until either a sensor notices it isn't getting a signal within parameters, usually due to suspension damage, or a fluid leak is noticed from a fatigue crack initiated by minor damage. Transmission faults have been noted and some owners have needed suspension replacements. The unit is a 7-speed DCT, and looking through reports of full replacements, these are most noted on 2014, 2015, 2016, and into 2017 production. It appears that the mild refresh in 2017 makes the transmission more reliable, as the faults are limited after this. Some owners report minor issues with the transmission. This usually was resolved with software over hardware. However, on the worst end of the scale, a few owners had 2 replacement transmissions before an overhaul was done at a Mercedes dealer, with the manufacturer picking up most of the bill for this. Exhaust valve sticking or failing entirely will not only be noticed in the sound of the car, but will cause an engine code. This appears to occur more on 2014 to 2017 built cars, but doesn't entirely disappear as an issue on later cars. Now, a known problem affecting several of the earlier cars is the driver's window not closing. Quite a few owners had to make repeated trips to the dealer to get this issue resolved. When viewing a car, it is advised to drive on the bumpiest road you can find. You don't need to go fast, but listen for any trim rattles. Trim rattling seems like a minor issue until you're paying for a full interior strip and refit to find it. I will set my usual reminder that common faults are accepted in the industry at around 0.5 to 1% of production, so it's highly unlikely you will suffer all of these issues, but looking at owner reports, at least one is fairly standard and should be expected. I also want to add some owner feedback here. The driving position and height of the sill means that some owners have said that as much as they loved the car, it just wasn't the car they thought it was. The AMG GT and R owners report this less, as they likely wanted a supercar experience. This was mainly the view of regular AMG GT owners that wanted something that aligns more to a Grand Tourer. Some felt the Aston Martin Vantage, which shares the AMG 4-litre V8 engine, did the job of a sports car and fast touring car better, but I will stress this was not the view of all, and many loved the AMG GT, feeling it was less compromised than some supercars, but didn't compromise performance. Then onto the recalls, but a reminder to subscribe to keep up with the channel and the latest guides, and if you find value in the channel, consider becoming a channel member. Member support allows for videos that may not perform as well, but are passion projects like this one. One of the most noted recalls was for drive shafts. Back in 2022, just 183 cars were recalled for this issue though. However, in earlier years, there were a higher number of recalls. In 2016, there was a recall for GTS models. This was also for drive shafts due to the carbon fibre and rear flange having failed adhesion. In 2017, there were 3 recalls, the first for software relating to airbag deployment, the second for the passenger occupant sensor also affecting the airbag, and the third was for seatbelts due to binding. In 2018, there were 2 recalls, both related to the airbags again, this time for a module and a software update. In 2019, there were 4 recalls. The drive shafts for some 2016 to 2017 cars were recalled. Again, this was due to bonding. The parking sensors across Mercedes then had a selected recall for the radar. A communications error was also recalled due to it struggling to identify the car's position. And a recall for seatbelts was not activating the pre-safe system on a batch of Mercedes vehicles. There were 13 recalls between 2020 and 2021. However, all repeat issues I have previously mentioned, usually just on later cars. As none are new issues, I won't cover this individually, but generally the early recalls are up to 2017 production, whereas the 20 and 21 recalls were for 2019 built cars onwards. There were 2 recalls in 2022. The first one was for the wiring harness on 2021 Black Series models, as the wheel speed sensor could get faulty readings. Then a software update was needed on 2017 to 2022 built cars. Lastly, a single recall in 2023 for the fuel pump on a small number of late-built AMG GT models. Next, the engines, and I'll cover the unit as one motor, but as earlier noted, the Black Series does make some vast changes. However, this creates a problem in that it's a fairly rare car, and so singling issues to a version of engine would carry some heavy bias, so I will include it within this section here. Now, the M178 engine can be split into 2 versions, the regular version and the LS2 engine. The LS2 is what goes into the Black Series models. Power begins at 456 brake horsepower for the 2015 model year GT and 503 brake horsepower in the GTS of the same year. This continues until 2017 when the model is increased to 469 brake horsepower and 515 brake horsepower on these models. The final update in 2020 takes the GTS engine to 523 brake horsepower. The GT Roadster gets the same 469 brake horsepower as the 2017 updated GT, while the GTC Roadster ups power to 550 brake horsepower. The GTR and GTR Pro share the same power unit at 577 brake horsepower. AMG also state this power in kilowatts at launch, held at 430 kilowatts for both, with the Pro making chassis improvements and being more track focused. All of these are then surpassed by the Black Series making 720 brake horsepower, and while peak torque is higher, it comes in at 100 RPM later than the GTR at 2000 RPM. Peak power is 6,700 RPM, much higher than the GTR at 6,250 RPM. This will all relate to the use of a flat plane crank, a different firing order of the cylinders, as well as the desire to squeeze horsepower figures, knowing track use will allow for sustained higher RPM. By far the biggest complaint was sensor faults, which fortunately were relatively cheap fixes when just software updates were needed. The active engine mounts can wear prematurely, although a specialist should be the one to tell you this after physically checking and not someone looking at an engine code, as this can be a false error. Well, the guide's going pretty well so far. The 4-litre engine for this car doesn't have too many reported faults. In fact, it's fairly ubiquitous across AMG models, and that really helps it out because as I checked out several different models that have had this engine, most owners report that it actually was a very reliable engine. And in fact, for most AMG GT owners, it isn't the engine that should cause you much trouble. The rest of the car, you may have a few problems here or there, but really the engine, as long as it's serviced on time and correctly with the right fluids and with a professional that knows what they're doing, you shouldn't have too many problems. And while the suspension and transmission may have thrown a few headaches, the engine had run them for high mileage without an issue. Anything past this and I would be being unfair for picking out singled issues that are not common, and so from an engine standpoint, buy a well-maintained one and it should continue to serve you well. On to our picks, and instead of a budget, I'll split it like this. For those wanting a sportier Mercedes SL, the regular AMG GT will be all you need. It turns the dial up, but not too far. For those wanting a car that will hang around with supercars, the GTR or the GTC will be the one to single out. The GTS is a bit of a supercar bargain because of the GTR and GTC, but I would drive the GTS against one of them to make sure it has enough of the supercar experience for you. And if you just want the loudest, wildest, shouty V8, then dig deep into your pockets, you'll want to check out the Black Series. We also have guides to the Audi R8, BMW i8, Nissan GTR and Jaguar F-Type if the AMG GT isn't for you, and as ever, all the best with your car search.